GM, I don't know. Crypto's so global. But anyways, really excited to have another developer workshop. I think it's like number, I don't know how many we've done so far, but that's fine. Introductions. I'm Emily. I do DevRel for Linea. My job is just to show off all the really cool use cases, projects, I guess possibilities that are you can work with on Linea. So we have a very special guest. I mean, I'll say your name because it's also Marcus. I'll let you introduce yourself later. I think you came on for a community call very briefly, but I'm very excited for you to come, like, give us a little bit more robust of an explanation and walkthrough of the graph. But I spoke a lot. Marcus, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, my name is Marcus. I work dev relations for Edge and Node, which is a core development team that is working on the graph. There's many core development teams that are all working on this decentralized indexing and querying protocol. And that is what I'm here to share. Really, how to build with the graph, how to understand the graph, how to really just get going with the graph in Linea. The graph does index Linea smart contracts. Anything that's on Linea, we can take a look at and index both the mainnet and the testnet. So we'll go through just interacting with the graph, how to get started with it, and then how that relates to developing on Linea.
Okay, fantastic. I'm excited. I don't know, is this where we hop into slides?
Yeah, we can hop into slides. And then I'll also say for anyone who is viewing, feel free to go ahead and throw out questions in chat. And I'm happy to be interrupted at any time. Emily, if you see there's a good question, just go ahead and say, hey, there's a question, and then I'll just go right to that. I want this to be conversational as much as possible. And just if there's anyone that has a question, throw it out there.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
you bet. Let's go ahead and share my screen and make it live. Can people see my screen?
Yes.
There we
Got
go.
the
Okay.
infinite screen going on.
The infinite screen going. Okay, cool. So before we get into the workshop, the official workshop, what I want to do is share some news that's quite important for anyone that currently is using subgraphs or has a subgraph on the Graphs hosted service. For those of you who don't know about that, that's okay. Just bear with me. This is pretty important. There's a 4 million GRT, which is the graph token that is available in a prize pool for those that upgrade to the graph network. So if you as a subgraph developer, or you know anyone else out there who is a subgraph developer, we have this upgrade window that is between now and June 12th, which is coming up quite soon. And this is the incentivization program that we are running. So I'll share this link in chat. And then from there, upgrade your subgraphs to the graph network, which we'll go into what that is in just a second, by June 12th. That's really important because on June 12th, there's going to be a closing of the hosted service. And from there, we are fully decentralized with our indexing and querying on the graph network, which is really cool. So let me just drop this link in chat and we'll get into the workshop. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. And hopefully that can be shared. Emily, you got that sharing?
I'll share it.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So here we go. We're going to go into understanding querying Web3 data with the graph, really what the graph is here for, which is to provide data to build with in a decentralized fashion. For those of you who are following along, there is a repo that I've built for anyone out there. Let me actually share the link also with chat. Here we go. This is the query workshop. This, and I'll share the other one while we're here too, just for you, Emily.
Yes, thank you.
There we go. Get all the links out there right now. GM, I'm seeing GM in the chat. Hello, GM. And really, if you want to be able to build quickly, this is the repo for you. It has vanilla JavaScript in there, Python, Apollo, and also Graph Client, which is another library that was developed by another core development team working on the graph that essentially allows you to start querying the graph very quickly. All you got to do is set up an API key and drop it in, and you can start querying different subgraphs. And we'll get into what that means in just a second for those of you who are new to the graph. So I love this quote. It is not the answer that enlightens, but the question. My favorite emotion is curiosity. It always has been. It's kept me going so many times in my life. If I'm curious about something, I am motivated to do something. So the graph is here to provide answers to that curiosity. And before we get into too much, let's just go ahead and think, okay, what are some curious questions we could think about some Linea smart contracts that we want to ask some questions about? Think about a smart contract that you're developing, that you're interacting with, and think about what questions you might want to ask of that. That's going to be the motivation that's going to push you through learning a lot about the graph. So what is the graph? Let's get into it. From a high level, let's go ahead and step back a little bit from indexing and querying for 1 second. The blockchain is very much write optimized, which means that, hey, if anyone has a transaction that they would like to make, pay the gas and then put it into the block. And then from there, whoever's first and pays the gas fee is there. And then whoever's next, who's ever next, all around the world, going to that chain, going to Linea. That is really how it is done. So in the block itself, it's quite disorganized. And so if we ever really want to have that data be accessible quickly, we have to index that data, which means organizing it. And indexing is organizing. So that's really important to have it be competitive, especially as a rapid, if you want to have that data accessible quickly. We got to organize it. So there's a read issue with this, where essentially saying, okay, if it's indexed, that's also great. But then we also have a read issue in terms of, okay, well, what if one piece of data not only wants to be read one time, but maybe a million times in a few minutes, or even more. So there's an indexing issue, which is an organizational issue on the blockchain, and then also a read issue where some data will never be read, and some data is read incredible amount of time in a very short amount of incredible amount of queries are going to be sent to that piece of data in a very short amount of time. So we've got an indexing issue and a read issue that really the graph is here to be helpful for. There is a 2.5 read solution, which is a centralized indexing and querying solution. They are out there. There's many different centralized indexing and querying solutions. We are working on the graph to be another decentralized layer that is absolutely production ready and has been for years now, that is never going to be centralized. We are actively decentralizing every part of our stack to make sure that if any of our indexers go down, there's always a backup behind it. And that's really what the graph is, where if you look right here, there's all these G's. These are all very artistic G's for the graph. And
Okay, now I understand.
there you go. These are all of our indexing nodes. And not when I say are, I mean permissionless. Anyone could become an indexer on the graph network and be incentivized by the GRT work utility token and index data from over 50 plus chains now. There was just 50 crossed, I think, just last week. So Linea included. So lots and lots of chains are available, Linea included, and then lots of indexers around the world that if any one of them go down, you've got backups. And that's a real, real big thing that we love about the graph, is that there's always backups in case indexers go down. And we all know indexers need to be indexing and querying solutions need to be have incredible uptime, just because if it goes down for a minute or two, that means a minute or two down for your website, and that's not good. So that's what the graph is here. It's for redundancy.
Cool. Can I interrupt?
Yeah, go for it.
Out of curiosity, no, super cool. Curious what the trade-offs are.
Yeah, so there's never a silver bullet in tech. The trade-offs of centralization to decentralization, is that the comparison that you're making, or?
Yeah, I guess centralized indexers versus decentralized indexers.
Yeah, so if you're going to, it's the same argument for Web3 as a whole, where decentralization isn't important until it's important. When we've seen many times, we've seen subgraphs with 5, 10, 15 indexers on them, and if for whatever reason, let's say there's a storm, or there's a power outage, or there's something going on with one indexer, to have a backup, that's a huge thing. And that's the same with any EVM compatible chain and any real blockchain technology. If any node goes down, we have state on the blockchain that we can refer back to and say, hey, that state is managed in a different location, we're good to go. The same thing can be said about indexing and querying, where if you actually want to access that data in a production environment, good luck going through Etherscan or any of these block scanners and saying, hey, we need to find this little piece of data. It has to be indexed and done in an incredibly performant way. In terms of performance, we're right up there with any SaaS company in terms of actual uptime and then actual responsiveness. The data coming back all the time is, I'm not going to be super specific on that because that is something that is let's just say it's highly competitive to any centralized indexing and querying solution out there right now. So we're always looking to optimize even more, and we can talk more about optimization in the next workshop. So that's
Mhm.
pretty good overall comparison. That
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. So the there for right now, and also for I believe this is what we're locking into with the graph network. We're going full in on the graph network with all the indexers around the world. We are in the process of sunsetting our hosted service, and for that we're saying, hey, if you're going to hop on the graph network, it's fast, cheap, and reliable. We have so much redundancy, competitive with any SaaS and any other centralized indexing querying solution out there. And the cheap affordability of it is $40 per million queries for anyone who wants to query the graph network. And the first 100,000 queries per month are always free. So if you want to be able to develop and do some hackathon type of stuff or just tinker around, we'll get into that too. So let's go into a key part of the graph, which are subgraphs. And if we look at this diagram right here, these little tiny arrows right here are really subgraphs. And we're going to zoom in on really what these are. Essentially, these are customizable APIs. And each one of these little subgraphs that we will learn to design very soon are valuable. And they're valuable in the graph network. Each have their own little valuable place in the graph network. This is, for those who are visual learners out there, these are customizable instructions. And basically, we're taking unorganized blockchain data and we're running it through a subgraph. And as we run it through the subgraph, it ends up in the subgraph's database in nice little buckets. And these buckets, entities, are very much available for all of us to query. And that makes it much more easily interacted with and built upon. So this is a high-level overview of the file structure of the customizable instructions. We will be getting into these in the next workshop as we build a subgraph together. But really, in this workshop right now in the beginning, we're only going to look at schema.graphql. This is the shape of the subgraphs database. And if we understand the shape of the subgraphs database and as also the comments in the subgraphs database, the comments written by a kind subgraph developer will help us easily understand what's going on in the logic, in the manifest, and in the data. These comments are key, and we'll talk more about that in the future. And I also said subgraphs are valuable. Each of these subgraphs right here will go into the Graph Explorer, which is the explorer of the graph network. Each of these subgraphs have a certain amount of GRT on them. And let me make the screen a little bigger so you can see. 221K GRT, 200K GRT. Essentially, this is an amount of GRT on each of these subgraphs that say, hey, this subgraph or this data, this API is valuable, and indexers pay attention to this subgraph, pay attention to the way this data is organized. And if you are going to go ahead and index this subgraph, and more indexers could hop on because they're incentivized by more GRT, then they get paid more. Essentially, that there's more GRT available for everyone. They get paid, and then also the subgraph developer who initially put their GRT onto the subgraph also gets paid, and there's always returns coming back. So look out for basically the GRT on subgraphs. The more GRT that is on a subgraph, the more likely that data pipeline is valuable in the Graph Explorer. And so that is the graph network right now. We already went over the 150 indexes worldwide. Right now, we just crossed 50, which is really cool. And there's 2,500 subgraphs that are already on the graph network that are available for querying. So what I want to do is we're going to go into the graph network in just a second, the Graph Explorer, and explore around. But before we do that, let's get ready to query a subgraph that's on the graph network, that's already decentralized on the graph network. So here are the 4 steps. We have to first set up an API key. We then will find and assess the quality of a subgraph on the Graph Explorer. We'll go into those comments, we'll go into the schema and see what that subgraph is like. We'll design some queries. We'll get some curious queries about that subgraph's data. And then you can go ahead and hop into that repo that was shared in chat to integrate your query with your dApp. And we'll go through that all right now. So before we get into finding and assessing a subgraph on the graph network and setting up an API key, are there any questions, Emily, in chat?
Um, so I have a question
Sure.
just to kind of understand. So I guess subgraphs you had shown earlier before, were those kind of independent developers who had created subgraphs that gained a lot of traction and then now like I guess people are indexing them, or is it more so like company sponsored, like they're like, okay, these subgraphs are really important so we're going to create them?
Yeah.
um
Great question. It's permissionless. So the answer is yes to both.
mhm.
I've seen subgraphs. One of my friends' subgraphs is doing quite well, and it's a great organization of data. And so he's getting a GRT return on that. It's being indexed by, I think, like 6 or 7 indexers right now. So that's great. A lot of redundancy there. And then there's others that are very much built by companies and have full teams working on them as opposed to individuals. So that's the beauty of the graph network. Is an open marketplace. It's an open market in terms of what you see on the graph network. All of it is permissionless. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess contribute to Web3 development and get your bags.
Yes, yes, that's really it. I mean, that's the cool thing I think about it, where it is open data, and having open data that anyone can build on. And if you want to build a cool subgraph and get returns on it, because it's a very well developed subgraph, you can get returns on it. And other people are benefiting because you've developed a cool subgraph and people like the data on it. And it's a cool system. It's just from bottom to top, I think the value of decentralization in Web3 is very strong, from the core all the way up to the end, the very tip of the graph, which I'm happy about. So let's go ahead and set up an API key. We'll go ahead and we'll start at thegraph.com. And setting up an API key is just one of those things you just got to do to get going with sending queries to the graph network. Now, remember, it's 100,000 queries that are free per month. So don't stress about that. And then it's $40 per million after that. So all you got to do is go to Subgraph Studio, create an API key. And there's spending limits, which is quite nice in terms of just saying, hey, we want to make sure that if it goes over 100,000, there's a hard limit. And then from there, that's a new feature that was just released. And we'll just call it Linea demo. And yeah, 20% buffer to unexpected outages. That's pretty cool new feature. And then that's the API key right there. So we can copy paste and use that wherever we want. And so with that API key, let's go ahead and jump into the Graph Explorer, which is exploring the graph network's decentralized subgraphs. And right now, we almost have 3,000 subgraphs on the graph network right now, which is pretty cool. So each one of these are subgraphs. And let's just go ahead and check out the Linea subgraphs. There's Linea testnets and also the mainnet. And these are the subgraphs that are currently available right now. So let's go ahead. This one was just, I know this one was just upgraded to the graph network pretty much a few days ago. Yeah, 2 days ago. This is Sushi Swap's subgraph. So this one right here from a high level is just being indexed, and it's just starting this process of getting more decentralization on the graph network. And so you'll see, because this upgrade program is going on right now, we're getting a lot of new subgraphs coming in right now, and some don't have much curation on it, not much signal. That's okay. With even just no signal whatsoever, completely free, there's always going to be one indexer indexing your data on the graph network. Okay, just to get started on the graph network. From there, if anybody wants to have more indexing redundancy, if have more indexers hop on, apply more GRT to the indexers to your subgraph. Let's go ahead and check out, not Linea. Let's do let's just see what the most popular subgraphs are without any chain. Here we have 207K GRT. We have 51K GRT, and we'll see more indexers that have indexed this. There we go, 7 indexers on this one. So much more redundancy on that. So now that we're into the subgraphs dashboard, let's go to the playground, where we can start to send some queries in the shape of GraphQL queries to this subgraph. And we're basically playing around with these queries. We can see what's in the subgraph and the entities in the subgraph over here. We'll go into this more. I'm just giving a high-level overview of this. And let's say we design a cool query right here. We could send that real cool query to this query's endpoint. All we have to do is drag and drop this into our dApp, and then from there, drag and drop our API key that we just built into our dApp as well, and we're sending this query that we've designed to this endpoint. So that's just a real quick high-level overview of the API key and how to send some queries to a subgraph. So now, I did say we were going to find and assess the quality of a subgraph on the graph network. So what I want to do is just go through kind of my like steps of how to assess the quality of a subgraph from a high level all the way to the shape of the schema. And then from there, we can go ahead and start querying subgraphs that anyone in chat would like to go ahead and dive into. So to start, what I like to do every time is take a look at just a quick overview. This is not like a guarantee, of course, but I already said how much GRT is on this subgraph. Generally speaking, this is the marketplace just talking and saying, hey, the market is deciding that these subgraphs are more valuable right now, and their data pipelines are more valuable. And see some big names here: Aave, Live Peer, Request, Party Finance, Masari, the Uniswap. These are going to be very busy subgraphs. A lot of data coming out of these subgraphs all the time. So generally speaking, look for higher GRT on the subgraph. There's going to be more indexers, and that data is just going to be more valuable for a greater amount of people. Generally speaking, that's not a guarantee. Someone might have put 20K GRT on something, and that subgraph was not great, but that was their choice, and it's out there on the market. The next thing I like to do is go ahead and see if it's a Masari standard subgraph. And you'll see some of these tags that say Masari on here. These subgraphs were designed by another core development team working on the graph. And these all have standardized schemas, standardized databases. So essentially what that allows us as builders to do is look at these Masari subgraphs. And as long as they are under the same category of subgraph, we could send one query. We could design one query and send it to like 6 to 10 to 20 different subgraphs and get data from all of those subgraphs back at once, as opposed to like creating different queries for each subgraph because each of their databases are designed differently. We can really see a lot of information from all over Web3 all at once. And the question I get then is, well, what categorization are these Masari subgraphs? We could find that out by going to subgraphs.xyz. And this is Masari's dashboard for their list of subgraphs that they're currently working on, that they're upgrading. It's always a work in progress. So we'll let this load. And then from there, we can see all of these subgraphs right here are bridge subgraphs. So if we design a query on any one of these that works, we could send it to any of the others. Let's look at the biggest one is exchanges. So if we create an exchange query that works on any one of these, we could send it to all of these all at once. And these subgraph schemas are almost identical. Some have small changes, so just be aware of that. There's small tweaks here and there where a query will work on almost every one except for maybe one or two as they're upgrading, because this is always a work in progress. Just be aware of that. But it's a really cool feature to be able to query so much data from so many different locations all at once. And all the different chains that these different subgraphs are on. So quite impressive from Masari to build, I think, 800 plus subgraphs, which is a lot of work. So those are the first two high-level things I like to look at in terms of the subgraphs themselves, how much GRT on them, and then how is it Masari subgraph or not, and then seeing if it's in the category. Then from there, I like to actually dive into the subgraph itself. And I'm going to go into this very first subgraph that I ever went into just to educate this. The very first subgraph that I ever was curious about was CryptoPunks. And this subgraph right here was literally years ago. I was like, what the heck is Web3? And we can see right here, it has a little bit of GRT on it, 326.4 GRT. And there's also a Masari version of it. So we already know this pipeline is already valuable. There's no GRT on this one, but this one has a little bit of GRT, and this is not Masari standard. Let's go ahead and assess this one and see what this looks like. So we see it's indexing. There's right now 4 indexers on this subgraph, which is great. I like to look then to see how well the subgraph developer has provided their README, basically. This information right here to give us a high-level overview of what's going on is, are there links to what the subgraph developer has permissionlessly put in here to say, hey, is this subgraph powering a certain website? Is this subgraph just meant for anybody to hop into? There's no website this one is specifically powering, but we can go into the actual repo and dive in and see the subgraph developer has been very kind and put more information here that is just, okay, we can understand what this data is doing from even maybe a medium level. And now we're going to get into that actual database shape. And remember I said about the schema.graphql is the database shape. If there are comments on this right here, this allows us to say when we are, let's say, to query this account entity, if we query the account ID, this ID based on the subgraph could be anything. It could be random, a string, it could be, we don't know. But because this developer has kindly put in this comment, we know what we're getting back. We're getting the account's Ethereum address. If we query the account punks owned, all punks owned by account. There's some that are like, what is assigned? What does that mean? Well, we'll have to go potentially into the code and kind of figure out what that means. Well, thanks to this comment, we know, hey, punks assigned to the account, if there's any. This is a really nice thing the subgraph developer has done for us to actually put comments into the database and allows us to move quickly and then from there design some queries. So what I want to do is let's go ahead and design some queries for a subgraph that is indexing a smart contract on Linea. Let's go ahead and do that and take a look at the comments right now for that. Is that okay with everybody here?
Yes, I
Let's
do
do
wanna
that.
interrupt,
Yeah.
kind of more as a summary statement. So you've described all the ways that what evaluating a good subgraph looks
Mm-hmm.
like. Can we flip the script and then kind of talk about how that parallels to what it like to develop a good subgraph and kind of
Mm-hmm.
like evangelize it as well? I'm not
You
sure.
bet.
Like what
You
should
bet.
devs do?
You bet. So developing a good subgraph is what we're going to do in this next workshop right here. Quick start to subgraph development and querying. We're actually going to build a subgraph together
Okay.
and we're going to see what that looks like and just go through that and what just a good thought process to develop this very customizable API, because it really is highly customizable. There's a zillion features and it can get overwhelming. Does that answer your question? Maybe
Yes,
that's not specific
it
enough.
does.
It
It
does?
does.
Okay,
Yes.
cool.
I mean, if it doesn't, then I'll ask you a different version of it later on afterwards. But I think it does.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Um, subgraph development is a developer is developing and its own educational pathway in itself. It's like becoming a front end developer or a back end developer. I think it's like literally it's middleware. It's right in the middle between front end and back end. And so yeah, there's a whole thought process about it, and it's understanding what the front end needs and understanding what the back end needs and optimizing the back end so the front end has an easier job. It's a really cool. It's really cool. I just think it's a really cool thing to learn. So, anyways, this is Sushi Swap. And it's a big company out there, and they do a very good job with their documentation. So let's dive in to their actual subgraphs code. Now, of course, this is permissionless. Subgraph developers don't have to put links here, so we can't audit potentially a subgraph developer's subgraph and understand what we're querying unless they put that there. So Sushi Swap has been very kind with this. Now, remember I said schema is the big one. Now, Sushi Swap, as you can see, has lots of schemas. All right, so that's okay. Let's go ahead and just go to the V2 schema, because this is for V2 Linea, and see how this V2 subgraph is being designed. Many times subgraph developers will put multiple schemas into a certain repo, and there's ways to deploy depending on their terminal commands to one location or another. So we'll go check out this one. And we can see, hey, we've got some cool comments in here. All right. So this allows us to not really have to dive in too deeply into the actual code itself, which we'll do in the next workshop. But we can say, hey, I always like to look at TVL. And so let's see if they put anything for TVL in here. TVL. Okay. Let's say total volume. There we go. Total volume. So we just see right here. So if we query the Uniswap factory, and we can see the ID in this case, so it's going to be the factory address, not the address that the This could be anything. I always like to have the ID of the entity. We could get more information. So let's query the Uniswap factory and get the total volume in USD and ETH of this factory address and go from there and just have some fun. And if there's any other queries that someone would like to make about this Uniswap factory, I'll actually drop this into chat here. And you can go through this schema and just like, well, what do we want to know? So let's go, where are we here? I think we're in Explorer. Was I in Explorer? Where was I? Where was I? Was I just back? There we are. Okay. So playground. So here we go. It actually pops it up in the predefined chat. And very nice. Let me send that query. And there we go. So this is cool. We get total volume USD right now. That is there. And then with total volume ETH. And this was very quick and easy. If we want to go ahead and send this query to that endpoint, we can go ahead and send that query to the endpoint right there. So already this subgraph is built. Already we're sending queries. We've assessed the subgraph. We understand the comments. If we want to go into all of those different entities that were in that schema, let's go ahead. I think I want to open this in a new tab. That was where I went wrong. There we go. Schema and V2. And we have all this information right here. What I do also like about the Explorer, where are we here? No, we're in Studio. There it is. What I do like about sending queries here is if we go into this location and where's that query that we sent? We sent this. Here it is, total volume. If you hover your mouse over the actual location, depending on if the subgraph is upgraded to the nearest version, there's a new feature that allows the actual comment to pop up in the front end here. So you can actually don't have to pop back and forth between the schema. You can just see, but I think the subgraph hasn't upgraded, which is okay. But it's a new feature where if you just hover your mouse over the top, let's see if it pops up there. Nope, doesn't do that. That's okay. It just has to update. But yeah, I would just simply get to be aware of this subgraph, just hopping between the schema, seeing the comments, and then sending queries back and forth to that subgraph itself. So that is understanding subgraphs. We understand the GRT, we understand how to send some queries, how to design some queries, and then how to just have a little bit of fun in the playground. Emily, do you have any questions about that at this point?
No, I think you're perfect.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and develop a subgraph ourselves. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Are there any smart contracts that you'd be curious about, Emily? Just curious on Linea?
I feel like people really love talking. I get the question all the time about the what do you call it? Linea XP
Okay.
contract. So I'm gonna send it to you in chat. This is the, I guess,
Perfect. I see.
Etherscan version of it, so you can copy paste.
Perfect. There it is. Okay. So this is the contract that we'll be indexing today. And we are going to go ahead and look at all the events of this smart contract. Now, subgraphs are optimized very much to index events. And events, if you don't know, are really important parts of good smart contract writing. And we could all see all the different events in the smart contract. Maybe they're defined on a different smart contract. Sometimes they have proxies that help with definitions. But the events, let's see, is it in there somewhere? There we go. Event. There we go. Sometimes it doesn't find it. There we go. We have an event. We have an event right there. So we're going to be, any good smart contract developer will be emitting events at the right time and place. Let's see, where was it? Make my screen a little bigger for everybody. There we go. And these our events are emitted anytime an important something occurs in the smart contract. So a something might be a transfer, a something might be an approval. These are very classic events that we see all the time in subgraphs. So these are the things that we're looking for. And you can see in the ABI, it also has good definitions in there. So just know that as we're spinning up this smart contract, not a smart contract, excuse me, subgraph to index this smart contract, we'll be looking at all the events in a cool way. So let's go ahead and do that together. If anyone wants to code along, feel free. This is pretty easy to do, at least in my opinion. But I've been doing this for a little while. So it might, if it's ever too fast, let me know. This dashboard in Subgraph Studio is really a development environment where we could develop in a rate-limited developing environment for our subgraph, just so you know. And then when we publish the subgraph to the graph network, that's when it is not rate limited anymore and it's available for everybody. It's public. So just to start with a high-level overview of what Subgraph Studio is, it's a studio where we develop and learn to extend our subgraph's features and then go to the graph network when we're ready. So Linea demo. All right, let's create a subgraph. So let's go ahead and develop this subgraph. This is the dashboard that we're going to be using. And this is where we can give good metadata to the subgraph. Like I said, when we do publish this to the graph network and make this public, we want to have good descriptions. We want to be a good subgraph developer and have good source code. We put the GitHub information, the website that it potentially might be powering, put it in categories. This is just good for people to make it searchable. Okay, have a good image. That's all just good stuff for SEO and making sure that it's there. So we're not going to do that for this demo. Let's go ahead and install. I've already installed npm in the yarn installed graph protocol, the CLI, into my computer. Let's go ahead and skip that just for the sake of brevity, and we're going to go into the init. So let's open up my iTerm. Right, cd desktop, cd.
You make this big.
Yes. All right. All right. Oh, what's on my desktop today? Oh yeah, that's right. Make dir projects, cd projects. I'm just gonna hop into just gonna do a little bit of cleanup here. Let's make this big. All right, is that able to be seen?
I think 3 more, maybe.
Okay. CD Linea. Okay, gotcha. Make it bigger. How are we doing there?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Yay. All right, clear. All right, make it clean. All right, so let's go ahead and graph init. All right, so we're going to be spinning up our subgraph locally so we can develop our subgraph. And we see a few different protocols that are available. Some are EVM compatible. Well, Ethereum is, of course, EVM compatible. Some are not. Near, Cosmos, Substreams, and Arweave are not EVM compatible chains, but Linea is. So we'll do Ethereum, and we'll do Linea demo. Directory to create. We'll just do all the default slugs in there, and then we'll go through and Linea Sepolia. This is eventually going to be alphabetical. That's a PR that's coming in. That's always bothered me that it's not alphabetical. So now we have Linea mainnet. All right, so very cool. Let's go ahead and find the contract address. All right, so where was that address? I think this was it. Did I pop it up? Here it is. We just simply copy the address and we drop it in. So it's grabbing it from Etherscan. Sometimes Etherscan or Linea Scan or whatever block scanner is out there is not as responsive as we like, and it'll say, hey, we're trying to get the ABI and we can't. Please retry. We're trying to get the ABI and we can't. That's just that block scanners just do that. To keep on retrying, it was able to scan, to grab it, and is also able to automatically grab the start block. The start block is where this smart contract was initially deployed on this start block. It doesn't make sense to index from block 0 all the way to today if the smart contract didn't exist at block 0. So we want to skip all those blocks and go to the block that is this one right here. And then from there, it'll index all to the current day's data. If, for whatever reason, we don't want all that data, we only want from last month or the month before, you can go ahead and update that start block. But we'll go ahead and index from wherever that smart contract was deployed. And it's good practice to name the contract name, the name of the actual smart contract, which this is the Linea Voyage XP contract. So we'll name it that. The reason for that is one subgraph can index many different smart contracts on the same chain. So if there's 10 different, 20 different smart contracts, good to have good naming on them so you don't confuse them. That really is important as you're extending your subgraphs. So now this is the cool part. This is where the power of subgraphs has really found its home in Web3 development. Index contracts events as entities. Essentially, this subgraph is going to be looking at all of the events emitted in the history of this subgraph, and it's going to convert those events and give them the same names, by the way. It's going to convert those names and give them the same events and put them in the subgraph's database. So we'll see this event emission, let's say it's a transfer event. It's going to convert it into an entity in our database, and it's going to be called transfer in our database. And it's going to store every single transfer event in the history of this smart contract as a transfer entity in the database. Does that make sense? Yes, I hope. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't make sense, I'll explain again, and we'll go through it in a more low-level look. I'll say medium-level look. But essentially, it's converting everything into all the events into our subgraphs database and organizing it for us. Okay, do we want to add another contract that's on Linea? Yes, no. We'll say no. And we could run through these steps and do it manually. I personally like to be lazy and go ahead and copy paste. So when you authenticate right here, what you'll do is authenticate your local computer to interact with this dashboard. I've already done that in the past, so I'm not going to do that. And it's a much longer string than that. There's a zillion more letters in there, but I'm not going to do that. We're just going to CD into our folder. Graph CodeGen and Graph Build is when we want to actually graph CodeGen and graph build, where actually CodeGen is the type safety and build compiles the subgraph, and it's doing that all locally here. It's getting it ready to deploy. And then we will deploy the subgraph. So we'll give it a version 0.01, and it's launching it to the graph. And very nice. You see the dashboard is updated, and very 0.01, deploying the graph node, little spinny spin, bum bum. There we go. So build completed, deployed to. This is where it's deployed to. It's in Studio. Remember, Studio is private, so if we share this anywhere, no one will be able to see it unless they, for whatever reason, have our wallet, which would be a bad situation. And this is the endpoint that we can start using for development. And we can see right now it's indexing. It's already at 17%, which is great. And we can see the current block it's on and the final block. It's blocks behind. There's a few million blocks it has to catch up to because we started at block, I think it was like 8,000. And it's indexing the data, which is great. And so we have this endpoint that we could use into our application and send our queries to. Remember, we already went over this. And we can start sending queries. We're not going to be getting data back just yet because it was just deployed. It's being indexed here locally in this development environment. It's not on the graph network just yet. Any logs that we create, any details that we want to update, this is the development environment of our local subgraph, which let's go ahead and dive into right now. All right. All right. There we go. All the pop-ups. Any questions so far, Emily? Any curiosity going on right now?
Yeah, so why is there a time when it would make more sense for someone to, I guess, deploy their own subgraph versus use kind of one of the public ones?
Yep. If you're developing your own smart contract, there's not going to be a subgraph for that yet. So if you're developing your own smart contract and you are a smart contract developer that puts in good events, essentially your events will have all the data that your front end needs. And if your front end needs different data from your smart contracts, you could always update your smart contract and do one of the upgradable style of smart contracts. And then from there have the same smart contract address. And so you don't have to keep on spinning up a new it's a little bit of smart contract development. If you are able to control your smart contract and develop that smart contract and then have your subgraph reflect the smart contract's events, it's very easy. Essentially, you're just basically making sure your smart contract emits everything that you need. And just spinning up a boilerplate subgraph will give you everything you need. You don't really need to customize your subgraph at all because you've done all the thinking at the smart contract level. So that's a really good reason to spin up your own subgraph. Another reason is, let's say a subgraph that's already in existence, that's already indexing a smart contract that you would like to take a look at, but it's not doing it's not indexing it in the way that you'd like. It doesn't have the features that you'd like. Then you could extend and make a more customizable subgraph if you'd like. There's, for example, there's like a zillion people that are indexing forks of the Uniswap subgraph. I've seen so many different forks of Uniswap. I've seen so many different versions of it. And that's because people like to change and transform the data in certain ways to their liking. So that's another reason.
Cool. So in terms of process, would I be able to, is there a button where I'm like, duplicate this subgraph and then I can like customize
Yeah,
it at my level?
absolutely. Like, yeah, if
That's
you, yeah. So if it wouldn't be in the dashboard here, it would be finding a subgraph in GitHub and then forking that subgraph,
mm-hmm.
cloning the subgraph, and then developing it locally, just like we're going to be doing here. And then from
Mm-hmm.
there, you can customize it to your heart's delight and run through the deployment process just as such.
Okay. Cool. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yep. Awesome. So let's go through the 3 key files of any subgraph. And we'll start at what we already know, the database structure. This is all of the events that this subgraph has ever emitted, every single different event type that has been emitted. And these are all being stored in these entities. And we could see each of these entities has a ID, which is going to help us as subgraph developers. A specific storage of a piece of data is going to be stored in this database, and it will have an ID. And we will see all of the different bits of data that were emitted from this event in the little in the beginning right here. We see that this role admin changed event was emitted, and it has the ID in this database stored as the ID. And this role admin changed has a role. Let me make the screen bigger. Has a previous admin role and a new admin role. These are the different bits of detail that were emitted by this smart contract event. And then also on top of that, just because a subgraph is pretty cool, it adds in a little bit more data that was just part of that subgraph. And just something you get to be familiar with. Every single boilerplate entity that is created will always have a little bit more data so we can just keep track of it. It has the block number, the block timestamp of when it was emitted, and then the transaction hash at which caused the emission. So we can really dig into the exact location on the blockchain of where that occurred. So you can see here, this role granted has role, account, and sender, and then we see the exact location that that event was emitted. So let's dive into the next level and say, okay, well, how does this data get here? We know in the database is organized as such. How does the data actually go and potentially get transformed and dropped into this database? We have to go look at the SRC folder, and anywhere in the SRC folder, we generally call this name the mappings file. Whatever mappings occurs, whatever transformations occur, it's going to be in the SRC folder. So let's dive into that. So here we talked about the role admin changed. We talked also about the transfer event. Let's go to the transfer. I think that's the simplest one here to explain. It looks very much like TypeScript. This is actually assembly script, but let's just walk through this step by step. This takes in an event, all right? And any time an event from the blockchain is emitted in the shape of a transfer event, this is triggered. All right, this will run. So anytime this transfer is emitted, it'll actually handle this transfer event that's coming through the blockchain. It doesn't return anything, it just simply handles that data. And initially, what runs is it creates a new entity. All right, there's a new entity in the database that's created, and it's going to be of the type a transfer entity. Do you see there's a transfer event emitted, and there's literally the exact one-to-one name of the transfer entity being dropped in. It's given an ID, and this is the ID that it automatically populates, just boilerplate. It's going to be having an ID that's looking at the event's transaction hash, and it's going to be concatenated with an event log index. And that is quite random. The log index is the basically index of all the events coming through the smart contract. And so we have the transaction hash concatenated with the log index, a very random ID, but that's very helpful to keep it unique. And then from there, all we're doing is passing from the event data. We have the event coming from the chain being passed into the database. So the event from, we see, is going into the from in the database. The event params2 is, let's use the mouse, not the mouse. The 2 is going into the 2. The value from the event is going to the value. And then we actually get a little bit more detail specific to the location on the chain of where it's coming. The block number is going to the block number, block timestamp, transaction hash. That's all this is doing. It's simply passing that data into the database. Already very powerful if we have created a awesome smart contract event series that are coming out from our smart contract. That's already super powerful. Now here is where we could do some transformations. Here we could do some extensions. There's lots of features that occur in here, but just for a quick overview, this is basically what we do. We create an ID automatically. We can have a more custom ID if we want. We take the event data and we pass it into the database, and then we save the database, save the entity in the database. That's all we're doing. And we'll step into another file here. Is there any questions before I move on here, Emily? Does that make sense?
Yes, I have a question.
Mhm.
So can we only index smart contracts that are verified?
Great question. It is a big part of this, and yes, it does help with the verification process to have the ABI. If you don't have the if it's not verified and you're doing like local development, and you have the ABI, you can manually drop it into the subgraph itself. It does need the ABI to interact with the on-chain data. So, however you get that is great. Verification does help to just have that be more of an automated process.
I guess along those lines, right? I saw that it was grabbing information from Etherscan. Is it
Mhm.
able to grab information from like Block Scout or other kind of block explorers?
It is from the block explorer of which the chain is grabbing it from.
Okay.
So yes, I know it says Etherscan, but it should be Linea scan. Yes, your block scanner. It does go to your local block scanner. It does integrate with that one.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, good
Cool.
question. Yeah. So this is all basically a framework of handlers. These handlers get super big and super fancy. I mean, think how much creativity you could do with data. Like, let's say you want to look at the role revoked event and the transfer event, and there's something interesting on those, and you want to combine them and do some type of logic. And this is where subgraph developers really get creative with data transformations, and that's really why also the comments here help because if you're a subgraph developer and you're doing crazy transformations in here and you don't put any comments here, people are sending queries to these databases and being like, I have no idea what's happened to the data because people have gotten so creative in here. So anyways, then finally, we'll go to the subgraph.yaml. Basically, this is a high-level overview of what the subgraph is doing. And this is where just saying, hey, if we're going to create new entities in the database because we want to create more stuff in it, we can go ahead and do that. If we want to create more event handlers for events that are coming out, this is where we could do that. But essentially, this is just a high-level overview of the subgraph. And where most of the work is in here and in here, where we're manipulating the database itself, and we are manipulating the actual handling of that data itself. So that is the high-level overview of how to develop a subgraph. And let's just see right now, we're at 38% right now. Already, nearly 500,000 entities have been indexed on this on these events, and we could run a query and start to get, let's see, sometimes they define, but they don't emit. Let's see if the transfers are coming through. Let's look at the first 10 transfers and look at the ID to value. Let's see if we're getting any data in here. Very nice. So we're getting some data. Transfers are a very popular event that are emitted from this, from pretty much any smart contract. Who's it to, and then who's it also going from? That'd be good. And so right now, this is the query that we could send to our subgraphs endpoint and start developing with that for free. Everything right now is for free because we're not on the graph network. Let's say we update a version on this subgraph. We'll change the subgraph.yaml to a more recent start block. Let's say we'll change that to 9. And so it's just, that's the update that we're going to do. And then we'll do, we'll do a deploy on this new version of the subgraph. Graph deploy, that's the name of it. All right, v0.0.2. So we have a new feature on this subgraph. We're like, hey, we found the new thing that we want to do, and we added it to our database. We created relations. We did some optimizations. We did off-chain indexing, on-chain indexing. We went to and were able to do some data aggregations, which is a new cool feature, by the way. There's so many new features that we could do in subgraph development. We'll see 0.02 is already there, and it's going to go ahead and start over. We now have different endpoints that are potentially available. We could see if we send a query to our older version, look at 0.02 there. We could send a query to 0.01 or 0.02. You see how that's changing. Both are being indexed. So it allows us to kind of tinker and, with versioning. When we're ready to publish, we go to publish, and this goes to the graph network. So we'll go to Arbitrum 1. That is where the GRT is located, where the graph network is incentivized. So don't get confused by that. We're not actually publishing the GRT to a different, we're not actually changing our indexing. We're still indexing data from Linea mainnet, but then we incentivize with the GRT in our wallet. And from there, we get more indexers to hop on. So that is the high level and medium level of developing subgraphs for Linea. Any questions, Emily, on this kind of high level to medium level to low level overview of the graph network, and subgraph development?
Yes, so I did
Yes.
wanna go back and, I guess, ask the same question as before.
Sure.
So I think what I meant more so was, there's mechanisms in place, right, for subgraph developers to, I guess, receive GRT,
Yep.
right? What is, like, best practices to kind of attract people
Sure.
to their subgraph? Does that make
So
sense?
yeah, to attract people to the subgraph, there's a few things that you can do. It's very much community focused. I mean, how do you get anyone's attention? If you want to become a subgraph developer, and just simply, there's a few different levels to this. First, if you're just developing a subgraph for your decentralized application that you just want to have for yourself, you likely want to just start with having one indexer on the graph network. So all you have to do is just publish and just put one GRT on there. You don't have to put a whole lot in there. And then from there, that goes to the graph network and you'll have one indexer incentivized. So that's great. It's a centralized place that's on the graph network. But the good news is you're not having any type of rate limiting in here. So if you ever get spikes of traffic to your decentralized application, you simply will have a unblocked subgraph on the graph network. When you want more increased quality of service and more indexing of your subgraph, applying more GRT onto your own subgraph is a really good way, because you're the one who knows the subgraph in terms of, okay, well, I want to get more returns on this. I want to be able to have my application be built in a more robust way. I want 2 indexers, 4 indexers, 10 indexers on there. Start putting GRT on there. Now, when your community starts to become aware that, hey, this decentralized application is being powered by subgraphs, by a single or multiple subgraphs or multiple chains, then from there you could say, hey, this is where the subgraph could be more just, hey, if you want to signal onto the subgraph, you could also get returns. Everyone in this community could get returns on the subgraph because it's being used so much. So that's generally the workflow that we see out there in terms of the use of subgraph data, because people aren't necessarily going to be putting GRT onto a subgraph that is not being used, that is a custom subgraph, that is just, hey, it's a new API out there. It's got to prove itself. It's got to prove its use in the marketplace. And from there, that's where returns start coming in for more people. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes
Okay,
sense.
cool. Awesome. So very much so. If anyone out there has questions about developing subgraphs, about the graph itself, about more features of the graph, there's so many crazy features that are in this in the database. There's a zillion features in terms of what can be done. There's a zillion features especially in the mappings. There's a lot of features in the subgraph.yaml that I did not go over, because that just is more customizability and we don't need to go into that. But essentially understanding these 3 files and starting with that, and then indexing the smart contract events from any of the smart contracts out there, and just starting with all the events that have been emitted, that's already a huge step. When developers out there that are watching that want to really understand not just the smart contract events, but really having more creativity and even compute being done in a subgraph, that can be done. It is a compute layer that is possible. So there's so many things that can be done as a whole. So that is the high level to medium level to not even low level. We didn't get low level.
Yeah, yeah.
Overview of subgraph development and also understanding the graph network.
Yeah. Wow, that was super helpful. I guess
Cool.
for next steps, right? This is creating the subgraph. Was the other, I guess the other GitHub repo you had posted was how
Yes.
to actually use it?
Yes. This is from, we kind of went from, let me share it right here. Let me just share my screen again. Da, 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 da. We, in this workshop here, where we went into querying a subgraph, this is really where we went from like 0 to 1 in querying. But because we were already in quick start to subgraph development, this is a workshop that I do 0 to 1 also. And we were already at like 0.5. We already went into the introduction to the graph. We already did a lot of this, the web tool. We already did a lot of this. And we already just started diving into subgraph.yaml, the mappings, and schema.graphql, like all of this type of stuff. We already went into querying the details, and we already did all this kind of in the code. So if anyone wants to kind of understand this from a different perspective and have kind of notes on what we did, we can do this. There's a few patterns that I go over in here. I think almost that's a kind of too advanced right now for like, this is where we get into more advanced entities, linking of entities, the helpers, other tips and tricks. It's almost too much. I didn't want to do that. So anyways, I think the most simple thing we did was today in just diving into how to develop a subgraph.
Yeah, no, this was super interesting, really helpful. We are at time, so I need to hop off.
You bet.
Uh, unfortunately, but if there's any questions, I'm sure we can direct it your way. I know
Sounds good.
normally we do this at like what 10 a.m., but life and
Life.
meetings,
Exactly.
yes, things happen. But yeah, okay, cool. I guess I'll say goodbye and I guess last piece, how do people get connected,
Sure.
websites that they should navigate to?
Just, I would say if you have any questions, just find me on Twitter. And that is the best thing to do. I just dropped that in chat there. It's twitter.com or x.com, Marcus _Rain _ two underscores. Someone already had Marcus Rain. I was bothered by that, so I had to add another underscore there. But that is my Twitter. And please reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns. I can direct you to wherever you need to, because there's so many different ways to enter the graph stack. Do you want to become an indexer? Do you want to go ahead and become, there's so many different ways. So just reach out to me. I'll chat with you and we'll get going.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Awesome.
Um, thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thanks.
Emily.